Recently, director Denis Villeneuve commented on his excitement and hopes for the intended sequel of his Dune adaptation. The result of his musings has led to some concern and some fan backlash. However, it is my view that this controversy has been fueled by certain entertainment sites imputing more than what the director intended. In this video, I'd like to examine what Villeneuve said regarding Dune Part 2, and whether or not there is a basis for this controversy, and offer my thoughts regarding the plan for the sequel. In a recent interview with an Italian magazine, director Denis Villeneuve was talking about his highly anticipated Dune adaptation. Denis had always intended on splitting his adaptation of Dune across 2 films. A wise decision, as the world-building source material is very dense, and it simply would not have done the novel justice if it was condensed down to just 1 film. As we are eager to hear news of Dune Part 2 beginning production, Villeneuve opened up about his excitement for the sequel and the climax to Frank Herbert's iconic story. He was quoted saying, "I can't wait to shoot the second part of Dune to get Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya back together, knowing that in the next chapter, Zendaya will be the protagonist of the story." To me, it's exciting to hear the director talk more about his eagerness to get started on the sequel, and honestly, when I first read this statement, there was nothing that jumped out at me that concerned me, as it seemed to align with how the story continues. However, some took it upon themselves to imply more than what the director said. In particular, an article from Collider, whose title says, "The Dune sequel will switch leads to Zendaya's Chani." I find myself disappointed in this particular article, as it seems like nothing but a cheap attempt to get clicks and drum up controversy. For one, the director never said that Timothée Chalamet's Paul Atreides would be swapped out as the lead for Zendaya's character, as the title of their headline asserts. In fact, the director first comments on how he can't wait to see Chalamet and Zendaya back together again for the sequel. So the implication that Villeneuve intends to diminish Paul Atreides and his part of the story in order to give that attention and focus on Chani doesn't make sense and is very misleading. Secondly, Villeneuve's statement about Chani being the protagonist in the next chapter of the story is actually in line with how the story of Dune unfolds. She has a much more significant part to play in the latter portion of Dune as opposed to the first portion, as the latter half of the book takes place after Paul has integrated himself among the Fremen people. So naturally, there is more of a focus on Chani, a Fremen warrior with a special relationship with Paul. His statement is accurate when it comes to Chani's story arc, but I'd also like to consider the possible ramifications for the rest of the characters as is presented in the director's statement. Some have embraced the idea of Chani being the main lead of Dune Part 2, while also implying that Paul's complex story arc makes him less of a protagonist. I'm not sure that is entirely what Villeneuve meant to say. While it is clear that Chani is very much a main character, especially when just considering the latter portion of the novel, she is not the only one. Paul, Lady Jessica, Stilgar, and Chani all have significant parts to play as the story continues. Any attempt to diminish Paul's contribution in order to give Chani more to do would not only be unnecessary, but would greatly deviate from the source material, which I don't think is Villeneuve's intention, considering how much he stated his desire to create a faithful adaptation of the novel. I'd also like to point out that the definition of protagonist means the leading character or one of the major characters in a drama, movie, novel, or other fictional text. It doesn't always imply hero or villain status. It is simply a term that describes how significant a certain character is to the story. I will concede that Villeneuve did say in a statement that Chani would be the protagonist and not a protagonist, and so I think this is the reason for the misleading articles reacting to this news. When considering the entire situation, it makes much more sense that this is simply a matter of a statement getting a little lost in translation, as I'm unsure in what language this interview was done. Regardless, neither Italian nor English are the director's first language. And if you've seen any interviews with him expressing his thoughts in a language that is not his mother tongue, you need to take into consideration the context of his comments to get an accurate sense of what he is trying to convey. I think this is the case here. While Chani is in the first part of the 2-part adaptation, it is more in line with a supporting role. and so I think the director is simply taking note of this fact, and how excited he is for her to be reunited with her co-star Chalamet, considering the significant part she'll have to play as the sci-fi epic continues. I'd also like to point out that the story of Dune is made up of more than just one person. Just looking at the first novel in Frank Herbert's 6-book saga, it is filled with a large assortment of characters, and even those with a smaller part that could be considered a supporting role by film standards have a deep, meaningful impact in the outworking of the story. Chani's part in the first half of this adaptation, while a supporting role, is vital to the Dune saga. I've said before that if Zendaya's Chani is anything like how she's written in the novel, she'll leave her mark to be remembered. From Villeneuve's comments about her performance, it seems like this is true, and I can't blame the director for his eagerness to see the rest of the character arc play out. In this same interview, Denis also emphasized how important women were to the Dune saga. While this portion wasn't highlighted in many articles covering the story, it could have played a part in the continuation of this controversy. I completely agree with his statement. However, the same can also be said of the men in this story. I think the way Frank Herbert crafted this story gives proper weight to both groups, and I strongly believe that each of these characters can stand on their own as they are written, without having to diminish the role of another. Considering what Denis has done with the character of Duncan Idaho, it seems his role will be focused on more than it has in previous adaptations. Strictly speaking, Duncan has only a few scenes depicted in the novel. However, his actions, while not always seen from a character's viewpoint, are talked about by others, and so there is a basis for Duncan to be featured in more scenes in this visual format of storytelling. But it doesn't seem that his expanded role will come at the cost of another character's contributions. There's plenty of story and world building to go around. In the same way, I feel it makes sense for Zendaya's contribution to be emphasized in the first film as well, and especially going forward in the sequel as her part of the story continues to grow. Considering the fact that Dune Part 2 hasn't been officially greenlit yet, I do feel that any strong reactions to the director's comments here are a bit premature. Hopefully we'll hear news soon about production getting underway for said sequel, so we can see Denis Villeneuve's complete vision of Frank Herbert's Dune. But I'm curious to know what you think about this controversy regarding the Dune director's statement. Is the controversy warranted, or is this simply a matter of making something out of nothing? Could both be true? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and be sure to subscribe for more Dune and other sci-fi and fantasy news and lore. Thank you all so much for your support, and as always, have a very nerdy day.